I never thought inheriting 1,300 acres of prime Montana land would turn into a legal nightmare. But here I was, staring at a cease and desist letter from the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. The irony wasn't lost on me. My grandfather, Samuel Yates, had owned this land since 1962, long before anyone dreamed of building cookie-cutter mansions out here near Bozeman. Now some woman named Brenda Hutchins, who acted like she owned the entire state, was threatening to sue me for violating covenants I never signed. My name is Simon Yates, and I'm a commercial real estate attorney from Seattle. When Grandpa Sam died 6 months ago, I inherited his sprawling Montana property without fully understanding what I was getting into. The land had been in our family for generations, used primarily for cattle grazing and timber. Grandpa had leased out small parcels over the years to generate income, but I hadn't paid much attention to the details until the estate settled and I became the legal owner. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was working remotely from the old ranch house, reviewing contracts for a client, when I heard aggressive knocking at my door. I opened it to find a woman in her late 40s with highlighted blonde hair, designer sunglasses perched on her head, and an expression that screamed entitled anger. "Are you Simon Yates?" she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "I am. Can I help you?" "I'm Brenda Hutchins, president of the Whispering Pines HOA. We need to talk about your complete disregard for our community standards." I leaned against the doorframe, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, but I'm not part of any HOA. This land has been in my family for over 60 years. Her face flushed red. "That's irrelevant. The Whispering Pines development sits partially on what you claim is your land, and as property owners within this area, we're all subject to HOA rules. You've been letting your fence deteriorate. There are rusted equipment pieces visible from the main road, and frankly, this entire property is an eyesore that's bringing down everyone's values." I felt my jaw tighten. "Madam, I think you're confused about property lines. My grandfather owned all this land long before any development existed. If your HOA is on my property, that's news to me." "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "Whispering Pines was established in 2018. We have legal boundaries and covenants. You'll be receiving formal documentation about the violations, and I expect immediate compliance." She turned on her heel and marched back to her white Mercedes SUV before I could respond. I stood there, bewildered and irritated, watching her drive away down the dirt road that cut through my property. That evening, I pulled out all of Grandpa's old documents. The property deed clearly showed 1,300 acres, with boundaries marked and surveyed multiple times over the decades. I found lease agreements too, dozens of them. Apparently, starting in 2016, Grandpa had leased small parcels to a development company called Mountain Vista Homes. The leases were for residential development, term of 99 years, at absurdly low rates. I'm talking $200 per acre annually. For land in this area, that was practically giving it away. I called my paralegal friend Marcus in Seattle. "I need you to look into something for me. There's an HOA called Whispering Pines near Bozeman, Montana. I need to know everything about it, especially its legal standing and property boundaries." "Sure thing. Give me a couple days." 2 days later, Marcus called back with information that made my blood boil. "Simon, this is wild. The Whispering Pines HOA encompasses 47 homes, all built on land that's technically still owned by you. Your grandfather leased parcels to Mountain Vista Homes, who developed the lots and sold houses. But the land itself, still yours. The homeowners bought structures, not land. They're essentially long-term tenants, though most probably don't realize it. You're telling me these people built expensive homes on my land? Exactly. And here's the kicker. Your grandfather's lease agreement with Mountain Vista included a clause allowing for rent adjustments every 5 years based on market rates. The last adjustment period was in 2021, but nobody pursued it, probably because your grandfather was already in declining health. You're within your rights to adjust those lease rates now. I spent the next week researching property values in the Bozeman area. The region had exploded in popularity, with Californians and Washingtonians fleeing to Montana for space and lower taxes. Property values had tripled since 2018. The current lease rate of $200 per acre was laughable compared to market rates of $1,000 or more for developable land. Brenda sent me the promised violation letter, delivered by certified mail. It listed 15 alleged violations, from unapproved exterior paint colors on my ranch house, to excessive noise from agricultural equipment, to failure to maintain landscaping standards. Each violation came with a fine of $500, totaling $7,500. I wrote back immediately, copying my attorney credentials at the bottom. Dear Miss Hutchins, I am in receipt of your violation notice dated March 18, 2026. I must inform you that I am not a member of the Whispering Pines HOA, nor have I ever signed any covenant agreements with said organization. Furthermore, my research indicates that the Whispering Pines development sits entirely on land I own, leased to the original developer under terms that do not include HOA authority over the lessor's separate property. I will not be paying any fines. Additionally, please be advised that all lease agreements are currently under review for rate adjustments per the terms established in the original contracts. Regards, Simon Yates, J.D. She showed up at my door again 3 days later, this time with 2 other people. A thin man in an expensive polo shirt who introduced himself as Derek Sampson, HOA treasurer, and a younger woman named Cynthia who served as secretary. This is harassment, Brenda started immediately. You can't just threaten to raise rates on people's homes. I invited them in, mostly because I wanted witnesses to whatever was about to happen. We sat in Grandpa's old living room, which still smelled like pipe tobacco and wood smoke. Let me be very clear, I said, laying out copies of the lease agreements on the coffee table. These 47 homes sit on my land. The original developer leased the land from my grandfather at rates that were reasonable in 2016, but are now far below market value. The lease terms explicitly allow for rate adjustments. I'm exercising that right. Derek picked up one of the documents, scanning it quickly. His face went pale. We weren't told about this. When we bought our homes, we were told we owned the land. I'm sorry to hear that, but it's not my problem if Mountain Vista Homes misrepresented the terms of your purchase. I have documentation showing continuous ownership of this property by my family. Your lessees, whether you knew it or not. Brenda's face had gone from red to purple. This is extortion. We'll sue you into oblivion. You're welcome to try, I replied calmly, but I'd encourage you to read those contracts carefully first. Everything I'm doing is legal and within the established terms. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. They left in a fury, Brenda making vague threats about lawyers and county officials. I didn't care. I'd spent my career dealing with commercial property disputes. This was well within my wheelhouse. Over the next 2 weeks, I consulted with 3 different property attorneys in Montana to ensure my legal standing was solid. They all confirmed the same thing. I owned the land, the leases were valid and enforceable, and the adjustment clause was clear and legally sound. The only question was how much to raise the rates. Current market analysis showed that developed residential land in the Bozeman area leased for between $1,200 and $1,800 per acre annually. I decided on $1,000 per acre, exactly 5 times the current rate. It was still below market average, which would make any legal challenge difficult for the HOA. I drafted formal notices of lease rate adjustment to be effective in 90 days as required by the contract terms. Each homeowner would see their annual lease payment increase from $200 to $1,000 per acre. Given that most lots were a quarter to half an acre, this meant annual payments ranging from $250 to $500 per year. Not catastrophic, but definitely noticeable. Before sending the notices, I drove through the Whispering Pines development. It was exactly what I expected. Oversized houses with manicured lawns, 3-car garages, and that sterile sameness that characterizes modern developments. Signs everywhere proclaimed HOA rules. No street parking. Trash cans must be stored out of sight. Holiday decorations must be removed within 48 hours of holiday conclusion. My grandfather's rustic ranch house, visible from several of these properties, must have driven them crazy. I mailed the notices on April 1st, which felt appropriate. I also included a cover letter explaining the situation clearly. They were lessees on my land. The original lease terms allowed for rate adjustments, and the new rate was still below market value. I offered to answer questions via email or scheduled phone calls. The response was immediate and explosive. My email inbox flooded with messages ranging from confused to furious. Several people claimed they'd never seen any lease agreement. Others insisted they owned their land outright, and I was perpetrating fraud. A few, surprisingly, were more measured, asking for documentation and clarification. Brenda sent a 6-page email full of legal threats and personal attacks. She called me a carpetbagger, a con artist, and several other colorful terms. She promised that the HOA would fight this with every resource available, and that I would regret trying to steal from hardworking families. I responded only to the reasonable inquiries, providing copies of the original lease agreements and the relevant sections of Montana property law. To Brenda and the others making threats, I didn't respond at all. The situation escalated when a local news crew showed up at my property. Someone, almost certainly Brenda, had tipped them off about the evil landlord trying to gouge innocent homeowners. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica, seemed skeptical of the HOA's narrative from the start. "Mr. Yates, residents of Whispering Pines are calling this an unfair money grab. What's your response?" I showed her the documentation. My grandfather owned this land for over 60 years. He leased it to a developer in good faith at reasonable rates. The lease terms, which were negotiated by lawyers on both sides, allow for periodic rate adjustments. That's what I'm doing. The new rate is still below market value for this area. Were residents aware they were leasing the land rather than owning it? That's between them and Mountain Vista Homes, the company they purchased from. I have clear documentation of ownership. If they were misled, they should pursue legal action against the developer, not me. The segment aired that evening and was surprisingly balanced. Jessica included interviews with several Whispering Pines residents, including Brenda, who came across as exactly what she was, an entitled busybody angry that someone wouldn't bend to her demands. The news piece also included property law experts who confirmed that lease rate adjustments were legal and common. After the news segment, I received an unexpected call from Thomas Reynolds, an attorney representing Mountain Vista Homes. "Mr. Yates, I'm calling to discuss a potential resolution to this situation." "I'm listening." My client is concerned about the impact this could have on their reputation. They'd like to negotiate a buyout of the land under the homes, allowing residents to own their property outright. At what price? We're prepared to offer $2,500 per property, total of $117,500 for all 47 parcels. I almost laughed. Mr. Reynolds, the land those homes sit on is worth at least $500,000 at current market rates, probably more. Your offer isn't even in the ballpark. Be reasonable, Mr. Yates. These are people's homes. And this is my land, which my family has owned for decades. I'm not interested in selling at fire sale prices. The lease rate adjustment stands. He tried several more tactics, from appealing to my sense of community to suggesting that bad publicity could hurt me. I ended the call politely but firmly. I wasn't interested in negotiations unless they started with realistic numbers. Meanwhile, the HOA called an emergency meeting. I knew this because someone named Patricia, who apparently disagreed with Brenda's approach, sent me a heads-up email. Brenda is rallying people to refuse payment and file a class action lawsuit. I thought you should know. Some of us are willing to accept the new terms, but she's making it impossible to have a reasonable conversation. I appreciated the information and told her I remained open to working with individual homeowners who wanted to discuss their situations respectfully. The meeting happened on a Thursday evening. I didn't attend, but Patricia sent me updates. Brenda had apparently worked everyone into a frenzy, claiming I was illegally trying to steal their homes. The HOA voted to establish a legal defense fund and hired a law firm out of Helena to pursue action against me. Their attorney, Roger Pemberton, called me the following Monday. Unlike Reynolds, he was direct and professional. Mr. Yates, I've reviewed the lease agreements and your family's property records. I'll be honest with you. Your legal position is solid. However, my clients feel blindsided by this situation. Would you consider a phased rate increase rather than an immediate jump to 5 times the original amount? I respected the straightforward approach. I'd consider it for homeowners who approach me respectfully and in good faith. The problem is your client, specifically Brenda Hutchins, who showed up at my door making demands and threats before any of this started. She sent me violation notices and fines for an HOA I'm not part of. I'm not inclined to be flexible with people who lead with hostility. I understand. What if we separated individual negotiations from the HOA's formal response? That could work. Any homeowner who wants to discuss their specific situation can email me directly. I'm willing to consider payment plans, slight reductions for long-term commitments, things like that. But I won't negotiate with the HOA as an entity while Brenda is in charge and treating this like a war. Pemberton sighed. Fair enough. I'll communicate that to my clients. Off the record, I've dealt with Brenda before on other matters. She's difficult. That's diplomatic of you. Over the next few weeks, about 20 homeowners reached out individually. Most were reasonable people concerned about unexpected expenses. I worked out payment plans with several, allowing them to spread the increase over time. A few negotiated long-term fixed rates in exchange for advance payments. One couple, the Martins, even apologized for Brenda's behavior and brought me a homemade pie. But roughly half the development, led by Brenda, refused to engage. They paid their original lease amount of $200 and sent letters claiming they wouldn't pay illegal and unconscionable rate increases. I consulted with my Montana attorney, Eleanor Chen, about next steps. They're in breach of contract. You can pursue eviction proceedings. Eviction. They own the homes, just not the land. Doesn't matter. The lease agreement is clear. Non-payment constitutes breach, which allows you to terminate the lease. they'd have to remove their structures from your property. That seems extreme, Eleanor shrugged. It's the legal remedy available. You could also put liens on the properties, which would prevent them from selling or refinancing without paying what they owe. That's less dramatic but equally effective. I decided to send one final notice to the non-compliant homeowners. I explained clearly that failure to pay the adjusted lease rate constituted breach of contract, which could result in lease termination and required removal of structures from my property. I gave them 30 additional days to either pay or enter into good faith negotiations. Brenda's response was to organize a protest. About 15 people showed up on the road outside my property with signs reading, "Stop predatory landlords" and "Families over greed." The local news covered it, but this time public opinion wasn't on their side. Online comments mostly pointed out that they'd signed contracts, whether they read them or not, and that property owners had rights. During the protest, something unexpected happened. A county code inspector showed up at my door with a clipboard. "Mr. Yates, I'm Inspector Wallace. We've received complaints about various code violations on your property." I invited him in. Let me guess. Brenda Hutchins filed the complaints. He didn't confirm or deny, but his expression said enough. We spent 2 hours going through every building and structure on my property. He found exactly 2 violations: an electrical outlet in the barn that wasn't up to current code, and a propane tank that was 3 feet closer to the property line than regulations allowed. "These are pretty minor," Wallace said as he wrote up his report. "The electrical is grandfathered since the barn predates the code, but you should update it for safety. The propane tank needs to be moved 10 feet. That's it." "What about all the other complaints?" There were about 30 items listed. Frankly, most of them were bogus. Things like unappealing aesthetics and rural activities, incompatible with residential neighborhood. Those aren't code violations. You're operating an agricultural property, which is permitted use. Some people just don't like looking at a working ranch. After he left, I felt a surge of anger at the pettiness. Brenda was trying every possible avenue to harass me, hoping I'd give up. Instead, it made me more determined. The 30-day deadline came and went. 18 homeowners remained non-compliant, owing a combined $7,200 in unpaid lease increases. I filed liens against all 18 properties. That got their attention fast. A lien meant they couldn't sell or refinance without paying what they owed. For most people, having a lien on your property is a serious financial problem. Within a week, 12 of the 18 paid what they owed. That left 6 holdouts, all members of Brenda's inner circle. I filed for lease termination through the Montana courts. It was a straightforward process. The lease agreement was valid, the terms were clear, the lessees were in breach, and therefore I was entitled to terminate. The court set a hearing for July. In the meantime, I started receiving strange harassment. Someone dumped trash at the end of my driveway 3 times. My mailbox was vandalized. I installed security cameras and caught a teenager, clearly put up to it by his parents, spray painting profanity on my fence. I filed a police report and sent the video to the kid's parents, who happened to be Derek and Tammy Sampson. Derek was the HOA treasurer I'd met back in March. Derek showed up at my door the next evening, looking embarrassed and angry. "I'm sorry about what my son did. He's grounded for the rest of the summer, but you have to understand, you're tearing this community apart." "I'm not tearing anything apart," I replied. "I'm enforcing valid contracts. Your HOA president started this by showing up here making threats and treating me like a criminal for owning land my family has had for 60 years. Brenda doesn't speak for all of us." Then maybe you should elect a different president." He left without another word, but the next day I received a payment from the Sampsons for their full lease amount, including back payments with interest. The court hearing in July was anticlimactic. Judge Margaret Foster reviewed the documents, heard brief arguments from both sides, and ruled in my favor. The lease agreements are valid and enforceable. The rate adjustment clause is clear and reasonable. The defendants are in breach of contract. I'm granting the plaintiff's request for lease termination. Defendants have 90 days to either pay all amounts owed plus interest and legal fees or remove their structures from the plaintiff's property. Brenda stood up, red-faced. "This is outrageous. You're going to make families homeless." Judge Foster gave her a stern look. "Madam, the law is clear. You entered into a contract. The plaintiff is enforcing that contract. If you're unhappy with the terms, you shouldn't have agreed to them. This hearing is concluded." Outside the courthouse, Roger Pemberton pulled me aside. "My clients want to appeal." "That's their right, but they'll lose. Judge Foster's ruling is solid." "I know. I've advised them of that, but Brenda is convinced she can win on appeal based on, I'm not sure what, public sympathy maybe. Keep me posted." The appeal went nowhere. The appellate court declined to even hear it, ruling that the lower court's decision was well supported by law and evidence. That left the 5 remaining holdouts, Brenda, Derek and Tammy Sampson, and 2 other couples with a hard choice: pay or move. Derek called me in late August. "I'm paying. Tammy and I talked about it and we can't afford to move. I'm sorry for everything that happened, especially my son's behavior." "I appreciate that, Derek. If you need a payment plan, I'm willing to work something out." "No, we'll pay it all. I just want this over." That left 4: Brenda, Ken and Susan Larkin, and Michael and Jennifer Torres. September arrived, and so did the deadline. The Larkins paid at literally the last minute, showing up at my door with a cashier's check and glares that could have melted steel. The Torres family paid through their attorney without comment. Brenda Hutchins stood alone. Her lawyer withdrew from the case. Roger Pemberton sent me a brief email. "Client refused all advice to settle. I've terminated representation. Good luck." I sent Brenda one final letter, certified mail. "Miss Hutchins, you have 10 days to pay the full amount owed, totaling $3,742, including the increased lease rate, back payments, interest, and legal fees as awarded by the court. Failure to pay will result in enforcement of the court's order requiring removal of your structure from my property." She didn't pay. On October 15th, I arrived at her property with a sheriff's deputy and a court order. Brenda opened the door, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked defeated. "You can't actually make me tear down my house," she said quietly. "I can," I replied, feeling no satisfaction in it. "But I don't want to. I never wanted any of this. You created this situation by treating me like a criminal instead of approaching me like a reasonable person. Even now, you can end this by writing a check." "I don't have that kind of money readily available." "Then set up a payment plan. I've offered that option repeatedly." She stared at me for a long moment, then slumped. "Fine. I'll pay $500 a month until it's settled." "That works. I'll have my attorney draw up a payment agreement." The deputy, who'd been standing quietly through this exchange, looked relieved. "Folks, I'm glad you worked this out. Nobody wants to see a house torn down over a contract dispute." Over the next 6 months, Brenda made her payments on time. She stopped all HOA harassment, stopped filing frivolous complaints, and generally disappeared from my life. The Whispering Pines HOA elected a new president, a retired teacher named Gregory, who actually knocked on my door to introduce himself and apologize for the previous leadership. "We'd like to establish a better relationship with you," Gregory said. You own the land we live on, and that's not going away. We might as well be good neighbors. I'd appreciate that. I do have one request. The HOA does want to maintain certain standards in our development. Obviously, we can't enforce anything on your property, but is there any way we could work together on boundary areas? Maybe some landscaping where our properties interface with yours. I'm open to that, as long as it's approached respectfully and you're paying for it. We worked out an arrangement where the HOA maintained a 50-foot buffer zone along the borders between my working ranch and their residential properties. They planted trees and shrubs that screened their view of my barns and equipment. In exchange, I agreed to keep that border area free of the loudest agricultural activities, and to store equipment that wasn't in regular use in less visible locations. It was a reasonable compromise that should have happened from the beginning if Brenda had been capable of acting like an adult. The story could have ended there, but it didn't. In January of the following year, I received a call from an FBI agent named Mark Torres. No relation to the Torres family in Whispering Pines as far as I knew. Mr. Yates, I'm investigating financial irregularities related to the Whispering Pines HOA. I understand you've had dealings with them, extensively. What kind of irregularities? I can't discuss details of an ongoing investigation, but I'd like to know if you experienced or witnessed anything that seemed fraudulent or criminal. I thought about it. The former HOA president, Brenda Hutchins, claimed to send me violation notices with fines totaling $7,500. She demanded payment for violations of HOA covenants that didn't apply to me. I never paid, but I wonder if others did. That's helpful. Would you be willing to provide documentation of these alleged violation notices? Absolutely. 2 months later, the investigation became public. Brenda had been running a scheme where she issued fake violations to homeowners, collected fines, and pocketed the money instead of depositing it into HOA accounts. Over 4 years, she'd stolen approximately $89,000 from her neighbors. She'd also inflated vendor invoices and kept the difference, adding another $34,000 to her take. The FBI arrested her on charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, and theft. Because she'd used the Postal Service to send her fraudulent notices, it became a federal case. She faced up to 20 years in prison. I was called as a witness at her trial. I testified about the violation notices she'd sent me, the fines she'd demanded, and her aggressive attempts to intimidate me into paying. The prosecutor used my testimony to establish her pattern of behavior: issue official-looking notices, demand payment, and pocket the money. Other Whispering Pines residents testified about similar experiences. One elderly man had paid over $5,000 in bogus fines over 3 years. A single mother had been fined repeatedly for unapproved modifications that were actually completely within HOA rules. Brenda had targeted people she thought wouldn't fight back. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was not sympathetic. Miss Hutchins, you held a position of trust in your community and abused it systematically to steal from your neighbors. You showed no remorse and continued your fraudulent activities even when confronted. I'm sentencing you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised release. You're also ordered to pay full restitution of $123,000 to your victims. I watched from the gallery as she was led away in handcuffs. I didn't feel victorious, just tired. The whole situation had been unnecessary. If she'd approached me reasonably from the start, none of this would have happened. After the trial, several of my neighbors from Whispering Pines invited me to a community barbecue. It was awkward at first. These were people who'd protested against me, who'd called me predatory and greedy. But Gregory, the new HOA president, made a speech. I think we all learned something important over the past year. We learned that contracts matter. We learned that property rights are real. And we learned that treating your neighbors with respect is always better than making assumptions and demands. Simon, you would have been well within your rights to refuse any compromise with us. Instead, you worked individually with families who needed help, and you've been a good neighbor since. We appreciate that. People actually applauded. It was surreal. I spent the rest of the spring getting the ranch properly operational. I'd let things slide while dealing with the HOA drama, but now I could focus on what I actually wanted to do with the property. I brought in cattle, repaired fences, and updated the irrigation system. I also started offering riding lessons and ranch tours, which brought in extra income and helped me connect with the broader Bozeman community. One afternoon in May, almost exactly a year after Brenda's first hostile visit to my door, I was working in the barn when a car pulled up. A woman in her early 30s got out, looking nervous. "Mr. Yates, I'm Amanda Newton. I work for Mountain Vista Homes, the company that originally leased your land." I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over. "What can I do for you?" I wanted to apologize personally for the mess we created. When we sold those homes, we should have been clearer with buyers about the lease situation. We weren't intentionally deceptive, but we definitely weren't as transparent as we should have been. That put you in an impossible position. I appreciate you saying that. I also wanted to let you know that we've changed our practices. All our new developments now include explicit disclosures about land ownership and lease terms in bold, highlighted text on the first page of the purchase agreement. We're also reaching out to every buyer from developments like Whispering Pines to ensure they understand their actual legal situation. That's good to hear. If you're ever interested in leasing more of your land for development, we'd like to work with you. With proper transparency this time and fair market rates. I considered it. I had over 1,200 acres that weren't being used for much beyond occasional grazing. "Maybe. Let me think about it." She left her card and drove away. I stood there looking out over the land my grandfather had loved so much. He'd built something here, something real and lasting. The HOA drama had been a nightmare, but it had also taught me the value of standing your ground when you're in the right. I never did lease more land to Mountain Vista, but I did eventually sell 50 acres to a conservation trust that wanted to preserve wildlife habitat. I used the money to fully modernize the ranch and set up a scholarship fund for Montana kids studying agriculture. The Whispering Pines HOA continued to operate, but with actual oversight and accountability. Gregory served as president for 3 years before handing it off to Patricia, the woman who'd tipped me off about Brenda's schemes. Under their leadership, the HOA became what it should have been all along: a functional organization that maintained common areas and mediated disputes without becoming a nightmare of petty tyranny. I still live in the ranch house, still work as an attorney remotely when I feel like it, and still run cattle on land that's been in my family for over 60 years. Every year on the anniversary of the day Brenda first showed up at my door, I pour a glass of Grandpa's favorite whiskey and toast to property rights, clear contracts, and the importance of treating people with basic human decency. The whole experience taught me something important about rural America and the clash between traditional land use and modern development. People move to places like Montana seeking space and freedom, then immediately try to impose the same restrictive rules they left behind. They buy into HOAs voluntarily, then act shocked when those HOAs have power over them. And they assume that because something looks a certain way, it must be legally structured the way they imagine. Brenda Hutchins is still in federal prison. She'll be eligible for parole in about 4 more years. I hope she's learned something, though I doubt it. Some people are so convinced of their own righteousness that they can never admit they were wrong. As for me, I've learned to appreciate the quiet life. I wake up to mountain views, spend my days doing work that matters, and go to bed knowing that this land will still be here long after I'm gone, hopefully still in the Yates family. My younger sister Emily has already told her kids stories about Uncle Simon and the HOA war, making me sound far more heroic than I actually was. The reality is simpler. I owned land. People built on it without really understanding the terms, and when they tried to bully me instead of talking to me, I enforced my legal rights. The fact that this became a whole dramatic saga says more about Brenda's personality than anything else. I've also become something of a local resource for other landowners dealing with HOA issues. Apparently my story spread throughout Montana and beyond. I get calls and emails from people in similar situations, asking for advice. My standard response is always the same. Know your property rights, document everything, and don't be afraid to enforce valid contracts. But also, try to work things out reasonably before going nuclear. Most people are decent if you give them a chance. The landscape around me has changed. Bozeman keeps growing, and more developments spring up every year. But my 1,300 acres remain largely untouched, a reminder of what Montana used to be and hopefully a glimpse of what it can still preserve. I've put conservation easements on most of the property, ensuring it can never be subdivided beyond certain limits. When I'm gone, this land will continue serving as working ranch and wildlife habitat, not another cookie-cutter development. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I sit on the porch and look out toward whispering pines. The houses there are well maintained now, and the residents wave when they drive past. It's peaceful, which is exactly what Grandpa would have wanted. The whole ordeal with the HOA lasted about 18 months from start to finish, but it felt like years. Fighting legal battles while trying to learn ranching and manage a remote law practice stretched me thin, but it was worth it. I proved that property rights matter, that contracts are enforceable, and that bullies don't always win. I think the moment I knew things had truly changed came about 6 months after Brenda's conviction. Gregory from the HOA stopped by with a proposal. The HOA wanted to organize a community event, a sort of harvest festival, and they wanted to hold it on the border between my property and theirs. They'd handle all the logistics and insurance, but they wanted my permission and hoped I'd participate. What kind of participation? I asked. Maybe some ranch tours. Let people see what working land actually looks like. A lot of our residents are from cities. They moved here for the Montana experience but don't really understand what that means. I agreed, and the festival was a genuine success. Over 200 people showed up. I gave tours of the barn and pastures, explained how cattle rotation works, and even let kids help feed the animals. It was the first time many of these suburban transplants had actually engaged with the agricultural heritage of the land they lived on. One kid, maybe 10 years old, asked me why I didn't just sell everything and let them build more houses. His mother looked mortified, but I just laughed. Because some things are more valuable than money, I told him. This land has been in my family since your grandparents were kids. It's not just property, it's heritage and history and responsibility. When you own something like this, you're not just an owner, you're a steward. That means taking care of it so the next generation can enjoy it too. The kids seemed to think about that, then nodded. That makes sense. His mother thanked me quietly as they left. Small moments like that made all the conflict worthwhile. I've stayed in touch with several families from Whispering Pines. The Martins, who brought me that pie, invite me to their holiday parties. Patricia and her husband occasionally join me for dinners. Even Derek Sampson, whose kid vandalized my fence, has become a friendly acquaintance. We bonded over our shared frustration with HOA politics. The lease payments come in regularly now, all 47 families current on their accounts. The income helps support the ranch operations and gives me flexibility to take on only legal work I find interesting. I've started specializing in rural property law, helping other families navigate complex land use issues. Life has settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings are for ranch work, feeding animals, checking fences, maintaining equipment. Afternoons I reserve for legal work, usually conference calls and document review that I can do from home. Evenings are mine, spent reading, riding, or just sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. The land teaches patience and perspective. Cattle don't care about legal disputes or HOA drama. They need food, water, and care regardless of what chaos humans create. There's something grounding about that, about having responsibilities that connect you to the earth and the seasons rather than artificial deadlines and courtroom battles. I've thought a lot about what Grandpa would make of everything that happened. He was a practical man, not given to drama or conflict, but he was also fierce about protecting what was his. I think he would have handled the situation similarly, though probably with fewer lawyers and more direct conversation. That was a different era, though. Things were simpler when neighbors settled disputes over coffee rather than through federal courts. The modern world has complicated everything. HOA, lease agreements, development companies, federal fraud investigations, none of that existed in Grandpa's prime. He dealt with ranchers and farmers, people who understood that land ownership meant something and that a handshake could bind you as firmly as any contract. But the principles remain the same. Respect property rights. Honor your agreements. Treat people fairly. Stand up for yourself when someone tries to take what's yours. Those lessons transcend generations and legal systems. I've been approached about writing a book about my experiences. A publisher from New York thinks there's a market for stories about the new rural-urban divide or some such marketing speak. I've declined so far. Living through it once was enough. But maybe someday, when I'm older and the memories have mellowed, I'll write something. Not for money or attention, but to document what happened when suburban expectations collided with rural reality in 21st century America. For now, I'm content to live quietly, manage my land, practice law selectively, and maintain good relationships with my neighbors. The HOA saga taught me valuable lessons about human nature, legal systems, and the importance of standing firm when you're right. But it also taught me about reconciliation, compromise, and the value of giving people second chances. Well, most people. Brenda Hutchins made her choices and is paying the price. But the families of Whispering Pines who were willing to approach the situation reasonably. They've become part of my community, and I'd help any of them if they needed it. The sun is setting now as I write this, painting my land in shades of amber and rust. Cattle are settling in for the night. Somewhere in Whispering Pines, families are having dinner, maybe complaining about HOA rules that actually make sense, maybe planning weekend activities. Life goes on, complicated and messy and beautiful. I raise my glass to Grandpa Sam, to this magnificent land, and to the strange journey that brought me here. I came to Montana expecting to manage an inheritance. Instead, I found a home, a purpose, and a reminder that sometimes the old ways respecting property, honoring contracts, and standing your ground still matter in our modern world. The HOA sits on my 1,300 acres, just like I said in the beginning. I raised every lease 5 times the original amount, exactly as the contracts allowed. And yes, I watched them scramble, watched them protest and threaten and eventually accept reality. But more importantly, I watched them adapt, watched reasonable people separate themselves from unreasonable leadership, and watched a community learn to work with rather than against the land and property rights that define rural America. It's been quite a ride, and I wouldn't change a thing. Well, maybe I'd have installed those security cameras earlier, but everything else, worth it. The ranch is quiet tonight, peaceful in a way that only comes after storms have passed. Tomorrow I'll wake early, feed the cattle, check my email for new legal clients, and maybe ride out to the far pasture, just to remind myself how big and beautiful this land really is. And every day after that, I'll do the same, because this is my home now, earned not just through inheritance but through fighting for it when others tried to take control. That's the real story. Not just about raising lease rates or fighting an HOA, but about claiming your place in the world and defending it when necessary. About understanding that land ownership comes with responsibilities and rights, and that sometimes you have to enforce those rights even when it's uncomfortable. Grandpa built something lasting here. I've preserved it and made it my own. Someday, I'll pass it to the next generation with the same message he gave me. This land is special. It's yours to protect and it's worth fighting for. The stars are coming out now, brilliant against the darkening sky. In whispering pines, porch lights flicker on. Here at the ranch, my own lights glow warm against the night. 2 communities sharing space on land that's seen decades of history and will see decades more. And I'm right here in the middle of it, exactly where I belong.